Thank you for joining us for another episode of Awaken and Power TV. I'm Ethan Fox, and I'm here with Micheila Sheldan today. And we will be doing a different show, a new series that we'll be doing over the long term. And this one's going to be focused on channeling, where I'll be coming up with some questions to ask the guides around specific subjects from ancient civilizations and archaeology to spirituality and religion to modern world events, and to sort of piece together a lot of the mysteries that we don't know from ancient times to even modern times, so that we can understand the fabric of the reality in which we live, and bring forth a lot of fascinating knowledge that's been hidden for thousands or tens of thousands of years from mainstream society, so that we can fill in a lot of the gaps in our understanding of these things. So now, just for the sake of this particular show format, I'll be asking questions. Micheila, or the guides, will be answering through Micheila, and I will not discuss any of the questions with Micheila beforehand, just so she doesn't have any thoughts or ideas or preconceptions in her mind before going into the channeling. That way, I can be sure that the channeling is more clear and there's no interference at all. So she doesn't know any of these questions, and that'll be the case for all these shows that we do in this particular format. So anything you want to say before we start?
No, nothing to add.
Okay, so I'd like to start by bringing in any collective that would be suitable for giving a general message to sort of start our conversation, and being that this is the first show of this format, anything that they want to say, and then I'll jump into the questions from there.
Okay.
So any collective or guide who is just to give us a beginning message, a general message to sort of kick off the show and to kick off this particular episode.
We are the Pleiadians. As always, we are pleased to offer our understanding of how we envision reality, but also how we see your planet evolving. And this is a daily changing event. And this is important to note because complex energies, they require some integration. So from day to day, things can feel very different for each soul on planet Earth, while at the same time, the entire whole of humanity may be moving forward and backwards into various dimensions. Our most important message that we want to share as of late, that we are noticing, is a major shift going on at the level of human consciousness in terms of the connection to each other. We speak a lot about unity consciousness, and it's a difficult term to define because it is not something that is so rigid in how it manifests. It is a fluid energy that through each dimension and in each civilization changes in how it moves creation forward. But here on planet Earth for such a long time, there's been a separate nature to each soul, which we believe is important. You are not here, of course, to experience oneness. Otherwise, you would not be here on this planet in a sentient or in a physical form. You would be in a sentient form beyond this earth. So the division of human beings and the delicate nature and characteristics of each human soul, they are very important to the overall vibrational energy and how things work. Yet, the idea that you are not separate but one is something that many have been pondering, and how that works in an environment with free will and with choice. Because to honor the choice of another is not always the easiest thing right now, with so many different ideas about the direction that the planet should go, and a great deal of influence, we might say, from those who are attempting to move it in a specific direction. Yet, beneath it all, we are noticing somewhat of a letdown in the resistance to souls living out their personal truth. And some may believe that this is not positive in its direction because there are so many deemed unawakened to what is taking place on the planet today and the great transition that you are in the midst of. Yet we think this one subtle change is so profound and so important, and this is why. When you do not have judgment to how others are directing their lives, you are not losing precious energy or wasting precious time on things that cannot be changed or forced by you. In fact, your life is the greatest contribution to the life of every other. So if a great deal of energy is being spent and expelled on judgments and evaluations of how other people are progressing, we notice there's a stall in that forward movement. So there has been a bit of acceleration, we would say, in our opinion, noticing the movement of the planet and the, we'll say, acceleration of creative energy and how individual humans are finding themselves in new realities or even feeling differently about the collective hologram than they did even months ago. We might say this is more peace or contentment that's being ushered in, which is a positive energy as well. Contentment, we know, is not looked at in a positive light either. Sometimes when we become content, it is assumed that we are not willing to work hard enough to succeed at something. But that is not at all how we evaluate this state. Contentment to us is a state of being where you are not only neutral with what is taking place in your own life, but you can hold neutrality and space for the lives of others, which is pivotal in our minds to the place that humans are in today.
I'd like to come back to those concepts of neutrality and such toward the end of our conversation today. But I want to spend a little bit of time understanding the historical significance of the time that we're in today, as well as cycles and things that have taken place over the last several years, so that we can sort of understand intellectually the context. And then we'll come back to what you just shared. So with that regard, the Pleiadians have had similar times in their history, have they not, in their evolution, where they were challenged by similar, maybe not exactly the same, but similar types of experiences we're having on planet Earth today?
We have had very similar experiences, in fact, almost identical to the ones that you are having today, because the history that you are facing, it is not exclusive to the Earth. It's a universal or a cosmic history that we are all working with.
And so what, in terms of actual physical experiences, were the Pleiadians in more of a physical form at that time, similar to how we are as human beings on Earth today, or were they in more of a higher dimensional state?
Not all of us and not always. So for us to answer this question, we have to go back quite a ways, because the origins of the Pleiades, yes, was a very physically focused civilization and star system. Not in the same way that humans are physically focused today, because the Pleiades existed in a dimension a bit higher than what Earth has been able to hold as of late. But there was a physical nature, definitely, to our star system, and still is today. There are many Pleiadians who choose to live in a more physically focused and material focused reality, but in a very high vibrational state. So some of the struggles in our early days had less to do with some of the monetary, for example, experiences you're having, or the inequalities that you're facing when it comes to resource being equally distributed. In fact, we didn't necessarily struggle through those types of things at all, because in our material reality, we didn't have so much resistance to seeing others with things that we thought we should have. And that, we believe, is the basis for how we've come out of so much of what humans are still enmeshed within. Now, this doesn't mean that we haven't faced wars, for example, even within our own star system, and differences in opinion and idea about how the entire star system should operate. There have been periods of time where each star cluster has become very different in terms of the beings that resided there and their intentions for how they wanted to live. And there were clashes of intention between these various subsets or groups of Pleiadians. But what we've come to learn along the way is that the clash in itself, or the division, is what caused all of the disharmony. And again, leaning back into our original opening message, if we were to release the resistance to allow those star clusters or groups of beings to choose what they wanted and to be what they wanted, as long as no harm was done, we were able to lift beyond this idea of separation and right or wrong in terms of choice. And this allows us to truly thrive, because many of the wars that you're facing today, whether it be a literal war on the ground level involving humans and physical harm, or whether it be chemicals, for example, that have been injected into your reality, these are all things that we have also faced. The difference is we dealt with them in completely unified and more harmonious ways than many of you are able or dressing, we would say, today.
Well, if monetary limitation or resource limitation was not a part of your experience when you went through similar challenges in your evolutionary journey as we are today on Earth, how was it similar? Because as far as I can tell, the fundamental basis for the struggles we have on Earth today are monetary. They start at a financial control structure that orchestrates or makes possible for all these other things to happen. So how can your experience be similar?
Well, we agree with what you are saying, that the monetary situation on planet Earth is the foundation for a great deal of trouble. We want to take it up a bit higher to say that money or the monetary system is a construct of sovereignty. It's a construct of freedom. And it's a physical construct, of course, that has been put in place on this planet. So monetary abundance in Pleiades does not work as such a physical construct and barrier to freedom. In fact, everyone in our star system and everyone on planet Earth comes somewhat with an inheritance. This inheritance is not only a physical monetary manifestation. It is a resource vehicle to support what it is you are here to do. And that is tied directly to the collective. So if monetary focus becomes a very physically challenging experience, it is always tied to a soul's inability to understand the workings of the universe and how it supersedes anything that exists outside of itself that could put a roadblock in the way to this freedom. So let's give an example of some of the things that we have been challenged by. Of course, throughout the greater universe, there have been situations similar to what you face. We have a great many resources in Pleiades that are revered by other races throughout the universe. And there have been times when these races have gone through cataclysms and have been forced to look elsewhere beyond themselves to receive these resources, and certainly come into the Pleiades to reap their rewards. But we did not see these physical structures and things outside of ourselves as our only value or the only sustenance that we had at our fingertips. In fact, we knew that if we could allow ourselves access to the greater universe through breath and find peace in what was taking place in the present moment, that inheritance would come back to us twofold. It is meant to. There is nothing that anyone is able to take away from you that you are not able to also self-generate. So the difference isn't necessarily in the dynamics of these situations so much as it is the perception of how they were playing out and our personal ability to change them.
I'd like to get into some of the historical elements that led us here and speak about specific individuals and such, just so we can understand the context and the underlying influences of all of this. And in the last couple of years, few years, a lot more people have become aware of the structures around the world that are orchestrating a lot of these events on our behalf. For example, the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab is an example. And we've learned that he had some close ties to Hitler and some German war efforts and so on. Can you explain what are the origins? Because I do find that there seems to be a German thread that ties even back to more ancient times. And I'm trying to understand, is this connection having to do with an Aryan race from the time of later part of Atlantis, or what is the connection that this particular collective of people seems to have that common thread?
Let's start with the genetic thread because there's a variety of different angles that we could take to answer this question. It is not, again, something that is very linear and definable only through origins. It's a combination of so many different aspects of history and souls coming to Earth and playing out roles that it's hard for us to define it that succinctly. But you've mentioned an Aryan race and you went back to Atlantis. And we want to start here and say that this isn't exactly the origins of what you're seeing play out with some of the world leaders that you're speaking of here. It is, however, an example of how that history has returned and repeats itself in different forms. Now, ultimately, we know you understand that on planet Earth, a certain genetic lineage will carry out. And we see many of these human beings that you're referring to as being somewhat hybrid in nature. And many of you who tune into these transmissions are hybrid yourself. And this is the point of truly being a universal being. There is history wound within your DNA. And the degree to which you choose to tune into that history is how it manifests through you. So we'll give you an example. There have been many who've been victim of wars and oppression throughout space and time. And certainly there are various races, even on planet Earth and within humanity, that show up as a representative of these oppressed people. But the more that gene and the components of that history are focused on, the more they come alive. And all of the sudden hybridize into a being that's repeating the same patterns and existing in the same hologram. Now, intention has a great deal to do with this because many of the people that you are speaking of, that we've referred to as hybrid, they have been programmed themselves. From the ones who have left the earth and put them in the place of things that were taking place prior. In other words, carrying out certain plans or agendas that have been in place for decades of time. Now, when we look at an Aryan race, for example, or a group of beings who are attempting to become the hierarchical ones, the ones at the top of the rung, This also manifests in so many different directions. It is not just one. In fact, we think right now humanity as a whole is struggling with this idea of success and achievement. It has just taken a very uncharacteristic and dark turn within in a lineage and group of souls that we don't believe actually come from Earth. They have come from other planets. And just like the cataclysm that we referred to regarding our own star system, these cataclysms are the true origins of these beings coming to Earth and all of the things that have happened since they have been here. They are looking at Earth as a very resourceful place to be. They look at human energy as a very valuable resource. And so they are implementing things to take advantage of those resources.
Now, when I'm referring to the Aryan race, I'm also paying attention to the cycles, or the planetary cycles and so on, such as the age of Aries, the age of Pisces, which we're leaving behind. We're moving toward an Aquarian age. And so when I'm referring to the Aryan race, and you're talking about this cataclysm that occurred, and these beings are descendants of an ancient race that left behind certain, let's say, for lack of a better word, a mission or something that's now being carried forward. So did this happen around the age of Aries?
Well, yes, we agree with what you're saying. And it's evident as you track the cosmos, because everything that you're seeing in the cosmic translation of these energies ties into a greater massive historic spiral that exists throughout space and time. It's seen in the pattern of your own lives, and it's seen in the pattern of every planet and race at large. And this is why these ancient sciences were taught to begin with, because those who understand them have the opportunity to reap the rewards of what they are ushering in. And this has been done, we think, beneath the radar of many human minds and souls, because unless you understand the energies that are coming, you have no idea how to interact with them in a very purposeful and sometimes hurtful way to those who do not see what you are able to see.
So would you say, from your perspective at present, in terms of our physical human experience, that that a lot of the things that took place in the world over the last few years in particular, but I think when I look at the cycles, it seems to me that there was an acceleration that started happening around 2000 until the last few years, where we started moving at a rapid pace toward a very centralized one world government, and that was the foundation on which everything became so globally orchestrated through a handful of world leaders. Does that timeline make sense?
We agree with what you're saying. We're working with a council of light here, but we want to lend some additional perspectives, because it isn't just the astrological influences that are going to determine how these events play out. Remember, everything that you are experiencing is a holographic container able to be interfaced by and tailored by each one of you. And this includes the progression of consciousness. So in other words, sometimes we think that bad things happen because they were predestined. There are certain astrological influences that bring back chaos in history, and certainly they do. But when a certain level of consciousness has been reached within a race, the ability to examine these things is going to intensify, meaning how they are perceived and how they are exhibited in physical form become very stark and very intensified. And this, we think, is playing out as well. Imagine that humans have been operating beneath the cloud of a very thick veil and density. And astrologically speaking, or based upon the timing of history, ascension was meant to happen at a huge scale. But at the same time, awakening had already been happening, and that veil had lifted and cleared. What you might experience is not only the challenge of what's coming to raise you up into a higher dimension, but you will see it so clearly that it will seem far greater than what it may even had been meant to be. Now we want to go back to the previous question and statement as well about preconceived planning when it comes to astrological events. If a group of hybrid beings with malevolent intent sees a collective of humans awakening at a very rapid pace, and an astrological, we might say, advantage to stop that awakening, they will take that advantage and run with it. And this is also a contributing factor to the intensity of the last several years.
Okay, so let me rephrase what you said in a more grounded, practical way that I would understand so that I can put it in context. So, what you're saying is that astrological influences provide a container with certain kinds of potentials. So, and then inside of those potentials, the consciousness of the individual or the collective determines how or what sorts of potentials are manifested. So you could have, for example, Pluto has been in Capricorn, let's say, for the last since 2008, and which some of the potentials there are we move into a world where there's more control and larger governments and more dictatorships and things like that, and that is now passing into Aquarius. So you're saying that could be a container of potentials, but then the consciousness would influence how we live inside that container. But if certain malevolent influences wanted to move the Earth's consciousness in a particular direction, they would look for a container like that where those potentials existed in order to exert that influence to redirect the collective. Is that?
That is correct. So let's go a bit further. Many of you do this in your own personal lives. You are looking for beneficial windows of opportunity to succeed in a certain area, whether it be in a relationship or financially. And these are times where you may put a little extra effort or focus into those endeavors. And this is also done on a very grand scale with the malevolent ones we are speaking of. They are orchestrating massive events during these periods of time to suppress a consciousness that they are seeing rise. But consciousness is not the only recipe. It is one thing to be conscious and to see what is playing out from multiple perspectives and angles. It's another thing to respond to it in a conscious way. So what we've noticed about this container, as you put it, over the last several years is that humans are becoming more conscious and more aware of everything that is happening, but perhaps haven't gotten to the point where they're responding to it either emotionally or physically in a way that diffuses it. So this somewhat gives the malevolent ones will say more advantage if it is known that they can emotionally charge a collective. They have more of a hand in maneuvering that collective in a certain direction.
From my perspective, in terms of the container conversation we're having here, that container of malevolent influence reached its peak over the last few years. And although I see it persisting for a little while, I think the new container, which will be going on into the short to long-term future, is not going to be as conducive to that kind of influence, meaning I think that society will now, it may maintain the same kinds of challenges we've experienced to some degree, but we're now moving in a more positive direction. Does that make sense?
We agree with you and want to add a caveat again, because this container you speak of, where perhaps the power comes more to the people, isn't guaranteed. It is an influence and an opportunity. So humanity must take as much advantage of working with the energy in this container as possible to make the most out of it. And what we've seen in the past is that these windows of time and opportunity have come and gone, but the level to which humanity has arisen has not been the highest possibility. In other words, there's still suppression that takes place within the individuals and then within the race as a whole, because those that are working the energy still know that it's less of an opportunity for them. And they may back off a little bit, but continue their efforts while humanity backs off as well and feels the ease. You see what we're saying here. Feeling the ease of the energy is wonderful, because our human spirit gets to relax, and we don't have to anymore be tuned into the constant fear or control that's taking place in an intensified period like what you were speaking of previously. But if we get too comfortable, in other words, and we let our guard down, we're not making the best use of that period. And this is something that many of us in star systems beyond the Earth do and teach, actually. Although it is taught in different ways, at a very young age, some of the intergalactic beings in our races learn of these patterns and when to flow with them and when to work harder and when to relax. And in doing so, our entire race thrives, because in a sense, it unifies us with a singular intention. We understand that it's a time for us to push forward, to become creative. We are always doing this regardless. At the same time, we know that the energy is moving us very efficiently, and these are the periods that we want to put the extra work in to get further in our evolution than what may even be understood as possible.
So, in the context of all that, what was the purpose of the vaccine that was so prominent in our experience the last few years? Was it purely just for financial gain for a handful of people, or control? Or is it in some way, maybe not consciously to those individuals who were human beings who facilitated this, but maybe through a manipulation from other dimensional beings who are working through their consciousness? Is it in some way to prevent this awakening that's taking place on the planet, or advancement of consciousness that the vaccine in somehow inhibits?
Again, we can explain this in so many different dimensional levels and perceptions, and we will. We will take the time to give our perspective in different areas. And at the very top, this is no different than the conversation that we just had about the construct of money. Anything physical outside of you deemed to be your savior from anything else is a falsehood. And what you are attempting to do is locate that place within yourself where the true creator resides. And right now, humanity has gotten to a level where they understand creation and universal law through higher and multidimensional translations. But to put that into physical action is something completely different. So we think that these challenges, if you will, they come to the planet to help humans put into place the actions necessary to follow the ascension that they have gained. But we know also there are a variety of humans involved in these vaccines at varying levels and understandings as well. Some are certainly focused on monetary gain because money is energy and energy is power. But genetic manipulation, again, has been a theme throughout the cosmos that continues to spiral in the history of every race and of every planet. And humans have not faced so much this theme as others who are speaking through this channel have. And we say this not to put ourselves on a pedestal or to make you believe that we've gone through more difficulty than you have. But we've come to the understanding that the most prized possession that we have at our disposal is our multidimensional genetics. So to put anything in the way that would interrupt that is truly not an option in very evolved star systems. But we know that there are groups of beings on planet Earth who are at a genetic disadvantage themselves. Let's speak to a few of these for a moment. Many are familiar with the Greys. Many are familiar with the reptilians. We can go forward and backward in time, and we could talk about their arrival on planet Earth and the reasons for that and their intentions behind what they're here to do. But at the bottom of all of this, beneath it all, the very crux or the core of all of these beings' stories and intentions is ensuring the preservation of their race. So if humans were seated in a multi-dimensional genetic, meaning multiple beings from multiple star systems came to planet Earth to lend the best of the best of their genetic prototype. Humans, although they don't see themselves this way, are a prized possession as well. Because if the reptilians are struggling with a genetic issue, they are able to siphon from humans what is necessary to strengthen them. But sometimes this comes at the hands of weakness. And what we have noticed is the programming that many believe is important to ensure human slavery is coming in various forms. Now, the vaccine may just be one of these manifestations, but it's an important one because when it is taken, there are several different factors to consider, but perhaps a chain of events, if you will. Number one, your genetic profile and predisposition is forever changed because something artificial has been put in the way of the divine blueprint and genetic prototype that you were seated within. What that means is you are predestined to experience sometimes the most karmic patterns in an exemplified way when it comes to the lineage of physical health that you're already dealing with. And this is why. You are born to be self-healers. The body that you have been given, that you've been born into, it's intelligent. It has within it, not unlike that inheritance we spoke of earlier, everything that it needs to thrive and to self-sustain. The only problem is it can become very confused. And when it does, it lacks the ability to regenerate and rejuvenate itself. And this is how disease takes hold. Because there are genetic limitations, obviously, that all of you are aware exist. And these we don't think are much issue. Too much is made of these predispositions, and especially the diagnosis of them when they rise up within form. Because everything is not only physical in nature, it's an energetic program. It is a pattern. Somewhat like a software program on a computer. The software program is made to run very efficiently. But if someone injects a virus or a code into the program, it begins to go awry and does not work the way it was intended. So this is the basis of how we see at the ground level all of this playing out. And it is truly manifesting differently within each being because each of you is unique. But we want to add one final thought, and our goal is never to inject fear into the conversation, although we know that much of what we've said already can bring some concern to the surface. The detoxification process of a human body is so incredible. To watch it from afar, energetically even, the orchestration of all of the processes coming together to keep the body stable and strong, it's amazing. And there is an agenda to keep the body in a state where it is unable to detoxify. And this alone is why you are seeing the decline so much of the physical body beyond vaccination because of the toxins that have been injected into your environment and the body's growing inability to release them back into the environment or to transmute them. Ultimately, we think this is going to be the future focus for clearing the body of these programs and bringing it into a stronger position.
And my research into viruses and various epidemics and pandemics that have occurred throughout our history over the last several hundred years, I've drawn the conclusion that all of these were related to, as you said, toxins in the environment and not necessarily a contagion that people were passing from one to another under natural circumstances. In many cases, such as the Spanish flu and even what just took place, and all of the various epidemics and so on that have occurred over the last 100 years, it seems to me that the viruses didn't actually exist, and the concept of a virus being something that's transmittable between human beings. But in fact, there were always toxins, either toxins from drug abuse or toxins from poor sewage or toxins which nowadays are being sprayed in most Western countries at least. And so my conclusion is that at least our understanding of what we're being told is a virus that was transmissible between people the last few years did not actually exist. But it was some sort of toxin in the environment, and in the end, the vaccine itself became that toxin and was what was transmitting what appeared to be a virus. Does that make sense?
We agree with you and want to add several points because we don't see it only being the vaccine. But we do want to wholeheartedly agree that any viral component in the body, it is not something that the body is meant to experience. It's the body's way of hyper detoxification in a state of weakness. So a virus is actually supporting the body's movement of energy, but the reason that the body becomes weakened is it's using every bit of its energy and cellular movement and organ propensity to rid the body of the toxin. And this is why fevers are experienced or various symptoms are had. But the transmissibility of a virus between one human and another is something that we have never seen. The commonality of the experience, however, shows you the environmental contamination that is going on. So certainly the vaccine has been a component of that in many respects. But we want to take you back to what we've been speaking of all along here, which is an advantageous container, a period of time when those with malevolent intent can make great progress. what we've seen is a rise in unnatural frequencies in the environment that also interface with that vaccine, as well as contaminants in your food and in your water. And this varies in different geographic regions, which is why you have seen so much difference play out in terms of the human beings that reside in these regions and the timing of them falling ill, as well as the various symptoms. Because while there is the collusion of a small number of beings at the top, those who are ruling various geographic areas are all making different financial and environmental decisions as to how to structure all of this. And this is because every geographic region is not only home to different human beings with different belief systems, but also levels of consciousness and karmic predisposition. It is hard to believe that karma plays into all of this, but you can clearly see, of course, that some souls have chosen geographic regions where the orchestration of a virus or a vaccine has been far more intense and difficult to manage than other areas. So we're saying there are many different components here at play, but ultimately we do agree with the premise of what you are saying.
And by frequencies, you're referring to things like 5G or smart meters, all of the things that have come out in the last several decades.
Especially 5G. This has been, for us, one of the most detrimental injections into your environment, above and beyond all other things. And in fact, it interfaces with that genetic programming most definitely, and it's causing a great deal of harm in the nervous system. And this, we think, is not only why so many humans are falling ill to other diseases right now, but also the reason there's been a very tremendous loss of hope because the nervous system is responsible for keeping the emotional and energetic balance of the human structure. So think of these different frequency levels as changing, number one, throughout each day, but also continuing to raise and intensify where nervous systems have to keep adjusting themselves. And this is not natural for how humans were structured, in other words. But certainly there are things other than 5G. When we speak of unnatural frequencies, we are talking about the hertz frequencies that are used that are very undetectable, that are sometimes found in music and brought into environments like large group scenarios, concerts, for example. We've even seen airlines and airports where a great number of people gather, having installed undetectable frequency devices so that messages can be implanted within the human mind and to keep the chaos level, if you will, at a low, or the consciousness level even at a low. So there are many factors at play here.
You mean chaos level at a high, or you mean, what do you mean by low?
Well, when humans awaken and they begin to see what is happening, there is a tendency to fight back. And so those who are in power do not want the chaos of large groups of humans protesting against things that may be detrimental to them. Or we've certainly seen a great number of protests, and those protests have been ramped up to show violence. So it does go both ways. Sometimes it's a suppression of emotion to a state almost of ill compassion or inability to be conscious or aware of what is happening. And other times it's been a causation effect to create that chaos.
Let me rephrase some things you said in a different way and see if I'm understanding correctly. You were talking about how transmissibility of an illness or a virus is not something that's possible. Therefore, our understanding of viruses is entirely incorrect, at least what's exposed in the mainstream medical institutions. So, if that's the case, and you're saying that viruses, or at least what we think of as viruses, which is determined by certain tests that have been used in the last several years, in particular, the test results which show a virus is actually showing the body responding to or trying to repair itself in the presence of toxins in the body. But so it's not actually a virus that's transmissible, but rather it's detecting the body's response to toxins, whether they be electromagnetic or physical or otherwise. And so it's really just a symptom of the healing process.
Correct. And this is what we were exactly going to say, is that the tests themselves, and the reason they are so unpredictable and so different in their result is that they are testing for the symptom as opposed to the virus. And that is going to almost always present a positive in some direction, because right now, every human body is detoxifying at a very high rate of speed. So testing, we think, is a very difficult medium to use to actually validate that a virus exists. All it is showing is that the body has detected and perhaps even interfered with something, or something has interfered with it, that's causing it to have to go into a hyper release type of mode.
And does this have anything to do with exosomes, or how does that relate to it?
The exosomes are a part of this. In fact, we see them as one of the most intelligent chemical elixirs within the human genome, because they are always the first to race to the area or the focus of the problem. And their job is to neutralize. So when they come into an area of the body that has been exposed to a toxin, they will call out for many more. And this is not necessarily a negative. We think it is a positive. It's truly the body's way of healing. So ultimately, when you are referring to an exosome, what we see is the multidimensional expression of your human genome working at its most proficient.
So if viruses are not transmissible, then there was really no need to fear any of the consequences of the last couple of years. And because it's not possible. So if we see similar events happening in the next decade or so, whether they be, I know already they're forecasting the next pandemic in 2025. So if we see similar kinds of events, whether they be physical health problems or cyber warfare or any number of things that may be orchestrated to take advantage of this time on Earth, for the handful of people who are doing these things. Is there any need to fear or concern about this and run out and get the remedy that they're suggesting, whether it be a vaccine or whatever it should happen to be in the future, if there's no reason for human beings to concern? Because from my understanding, we're all here to have our own experience, and if we're meant to die of an illness, for example, it would happen anyway because we chose that beforehand. And if we're meant to live to 80 or 100 years old, it will happen anyway, regardless. So even if theoretically viruses really did exist and they were transmissible, we could stand right in the middle of that and not be affected if we as a soul had chosen to live to 100 years old.
You've brought a lot of topics here to our attentions, and we do want to spend some time to address them all. And we'll start with the journey of a soul. There is a predestined plan that each soul comes with, and a timing of evaluation when that soul will transition and leave its life behind. So the very idea that anyone should fear death is truly putting something in the way of freedom. And perhaps that is why so much fear is being injected into this timeline to begin with, so that humans realize that that fear is merely a roadblock to their happiness. But we have great compassion because we know how fearful it can be to receive so many warnings of what is yet to come. And what we've learned in our various star systems is that fear can be a very valuable frequency to work with. It is just how you choose to consciously maneuver through it that makes all of the difference. So you're asking us, does anything need to be done in order to heal outside of you? And to some degree, we must say that some souls are predestined to do certain things, even to choose a vaccine that may not be in their best interest. And here's why. They have volunteered to, through the contribution of their life and their choices, to leave behind a legacy that inspires others to change. And this, we can say, manifests itself in many different directions, even the choice to die at an early age. Angels come in who have been ascended masters in many different lifetimes on planet Earth and beyond. And they want to take the suffering for those who have not experienced it before. And in doing so, they may be deemed unconscious or having made a mistake when in fact they were here to force forward an incredible awakening of consciousness. Yet we know that the fear of what is coming next can actually usher in the things that you do not want to happen. So we have to bring creation into this answer. What you are paying attention to now is going to predetermine what shows up in your hologram tomorrow, but only to the degree that you perceive it in fear. So it's not necessarily a concern that we have to think that there could be another pandemic that is being planned by those in power, but to see it as it is and continue to live your life beyond it. Because as a self-healer, you have the opportunity to move the planet forward and create whatever you desire in your life as long as it fits within that predestined plan. Do you see what we're saying here? There's always an interface. And some people are meant to do things and others are not. But the doing is not what you are here focused on so much. It is the feeling that evokes the doing that you're attempting to slow down in the midst of. Because there's been such rash and very quick decisions made through fear in the past. And this is how truly humanity has been enslaved. Because the moment that a choice is made out of fear, it is going to become the criteria for the next choice that is made. And there's a lineage of suppression through all of those choices. You are here right now. On the whole of humanity is here right now to pause before the choice and to feel everything that rises to the surface prior to allowing those feelings to be the impetus for the choice. And it's not to say that feeling is wrong. We're actually attempting to prove the opposite. That how you feel is going to determine the level of trust or intimacy that you have with your own self-authority. But to feel and to observe yourself in the feeling is the ultimate form of higher consciousness. To feel fear, but to realize that the fear is not the determining factor in the choice, is where you are all meant to head.
So if we were to look back over the last few years and let's say the vast majority of the human race experienced fear from all these circumstances that have taken place, but instead of reacting to that fear by worrying about dying or spreading a contagion, everybody just went about their life and continued to do whatever made them happy, then we probably would be in a different circumstance on the planet today, and maybe even the various other things that are planned to be orchestrated later throughout this decade would never have been a possibility. Is that what you're saying?
That is exactly what we are saying. Outside influence has no bearing on what you are here and meant to do. Outside influence is somewhat like a barometer to how you are able to measure your relationship to self-knowing and truth. And this has been, we know, for a very long time backwards. The outside influence is becoming the measurement of how well we are doing or how we should do certain things, when in fact, we are here to live from within and to choose from within and to see what is happening as not something necessarily that we have to interact with deliberately, but it can be the contrast that is showing us a better path.
And we're finding on the other side of this that there are many physical consequences, and psychological and others too, from the vaccine and other toxins, obviously 5G, which also came out at about the same time. So all of these events took place in the last few years. Consequences such as heart-related issues and infertility and so on. Have we, or a good number of the Earth's population, altered their genetics now? Are there multiple races of human beings that now exist as a result of the genetic manipulation of the vaccine?
We wouldn't necessarily say that there are multiple human races with different genetics. What we will say is that some of those who chose the vaccine are now dealing with the chaos of an internal program that is focusing their body in the wrong direction. And this cannot be defined in one way. And this is why we have said each unique individual will respond just as uniquely, even though, of course, you are seeing patterns. And we'll explain some of those in a moment. But the immune system, the human immune system, again, it is miraculous. And if it is directed or suppressed, meaning it is focused in one very small area and not the holistic viewpoint of everything that is necessary to tend to in a human body, the genetics will weaken. And so certainly what we're seeing is a stronger human genetic and one that is becoming weakened by certain decisions. And when we say weakened, those people are succumbing to certain ancient lineages and physical diseases that truly need not manifest into form, but because the body does not have the ability to hold them at bay, are coming in a more exemplified way. Now, something that you've mentioned is the heart. And of course, we have to comment on this because it is quite a theme that is shown in many who are choosing this path. And this is where the true connection between frequency modification that we've discussed and this protocol is coming to light. Because the heart is an electromagnetic organ. And it's a vehicle of frequency, of working with rhythms and patterns of the universe. It is not just the rhythms within a physical body itself, but it's how the resonance of the heart is connecting to things outside of it that are very important. So the interruption here has been very profound. And we're also seeing it more tending to manifest in the masculine gender, not because of the structure so much physically, but because the divine masculine has been a bit behind in its spiritual evolution and working with frequency. An open heart, which many of the feminine masters who have been diving deeply into these spiritual principles have, is a stronger heart. It's one that can moderate negative frequencies as opposed to be weakened by them. So this is something we certainly concern about. But you've also mentioned the fetus and the child that may be affected during pregnancy. And we have, as well as many other races throughout space and time, dealt with these agendas, we'll call them again, of depopulation and focusing on ensuring that future generations either do not thrive or do not come in certain numbers. On planet Earth today, it is evident that future generations are more sensitive, they're more crystal. Some of them are coming with very profound gifts and abilities. So the sensitivity of these beings prior to emerging from the womb and being exposed to such a toxified chemical or perhaps genetic program, it is affecting their ability to thrive. It is no different than a soul who is an ascended master, let's say, or a hybrid child becoming somewhat autistic because they have an inability to detoxify themselves. And they have been so exposed in their life to things that they are extra sensitive to that they are thrown off kilter. So there are a variety of patterns that are playing out that are very similar on planet Earth that can be seen in the cosm of these singular events.
You mentioned the Greys a little while ago. And some years ago, we were discussing the Greys and that the Greys were a future evolution of the human race or the human civilization, one in which they did a lot of genetic modification and as a result were not able to procreate anymore or proliferate their race. And that they had come back to repair that or to witness a time when it occurred. It seems to me the time that we're in now could potentially be that time. First of all, is that timeline of the Greys that we discussed years ago, is that still relevant? Is that still accurate today?
It is still accurate because it is a part of history, which is actually the future coming back to experience itself in the present moment. But the Greys are also evolutionary beings, not unlike humanity. So to put them in one category and to see them as stagnant and having not changed themselves diminishes the path that they are on. Many would qualify or define them as malevolent souls or lost souls or ones who are here to siphon from us the genetics that they need in order to sustain themselves. When in fact, what we're seeing is some of them, not all of them, are coming back as teachers. They're here to help us see the potential of what may happen if we continue down a path of unconsciousness. But just because a future timeline exists does not mean the one that we are on will cross with it. And this is important to always realize because there are infinite potentials. There is a vibrational container through which those potentials interface with our own, but essentially we are always the one choosing which timelines to include in our reality and how to meld them together into one.
Okay, so the event that occurred in that timeline,
Yes.
is that during this time that we're currently experiencing, or is it a totally different timeline that doesn't exist in our future?
Yes, we see it as a totally different timeline that is very relatable to what is happening today. And we really want to explain this in a kind of quantum aspect because it is hard, we know, to understand the future of where you stand today, thinking, of course, it's a linear path that is inevitable. Everything that has happened in the future does not stem from the timeline that you are on now, nor the moment you stand in today. It's almost as if you could see the fanning out of so many timelines and possibilities from this one moment that millions of future timelines have manifested from that. We see the event with the grays being more of a nuclear event as opposed to one that is exactly what you're experiencing today. However, very aimed at the genetics and disrupting genetic programs.
Based on what we've been discussing so far, I'm just going to assemble a few pieces together and come up with an idea here, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. So if we are choosing our life journey before we incarnate, including when we leave the planet, then the people who died in the last few years of whatever they died from, which in many cases people believe that it was a virus, it was transmissible, is it reasonable to say that those people were always going to die then anyway? And if it wasn't from what they believed it was, or let's say the last 2 years did not happen, or 3 years didn't happen the way that it actually did, and there was no virus fear going around, and there was no vaccine, would these people who died still have died because that was just something they chose to do at this point in their linear time? And those of us who continued on, we're always going to continue on. It wouldn't have really mattered whether we took a vaccine or not.
What you are saying is something we agree with, but want to expand on a bit, because while souls make choices as to the timing of their incarnation and when they will leave the planet, sometimes there are multiple options and periods that those decisions are possible. And it is not unusual for a soul to schedule these periods of decision coinciding with, again, a very collectively intense period of awakening, meaning choice is often important. Yes, there are predestined moments that your soul will choose to transition, but between here and there are so many other factors that must be considered. Let's speak first to the dimension that you have been in, which is a very important thing to add to this conversation. Because in the third dimension, there's been a great deal of change here on planet Earth. And we don't want to take this conversation too far out of context, but we do want to remind everyone that Earth has been somewhat encapsulated or sanctioned from the universal grid. We hate to use that word sanctioned, but we know it resonates with some of you. And this isn't because humans were doing something wrong. It was because the replay of karma and trauma on planet Earth was so astounding that the potential for that to skew timelines elsewhere became too great. So the third dimension became somewhat this recycle of souls, where the opportunity to transition beyond the earth, to take roles in other star systems and on other planets was very limited. Not because that choice was taken away, but because evolution within souls has not been happening at the rate of speed that it is expected. So armies of souls have been coming back, knowing that they want to move the planet along. And in doing so, there would be intense periods of time that they may make choices that were purposeful to leave behind the legacy that we've talked about, or choose elsewhere or otherwise and leave behind a different one. So it isn't always so cut and dry and set in stone. Yet, we want to explain that the period of time, especially the last 2 years that you have spoken of, where malevolent forces have taken great advantage, was always seen from the astral as a period of great transition. And those transitions are happening in many different levels within humans. Multiple transitions are happening within one incarnation, meaning a soul is changing dramatically between various phases of life through awakening. And that's just as important as decisions to leave the planet. So we might say, yes, an army of souls came knowing that this would be a predestined period of great transition and difficulty, and chose to leave behind a legacy of their demise, to force forward consciousness so that different choices would be made in the future. And there are some, unknowing that this was a period of review, chose also to interface with something that would cause their demise. Both of these scenarios are true.
Okay, let's take a step back then, and I want to expand on that concept a little bit because, so what you're saying now, when I use the term death or lifespan, I'm referring to a linear concept.
Yes.
That's based on time. So, which we as human beings experience on planet Earth. So, when we see birth and death, we see it as a linear construct. And if we die at age 50 versus age 90, that's a linear perspective for us. And so if I were to use that linear construct to explain the concept of a soul's journey, I might say a person chose to die at age 90 and therefore they're going to die at age 90 of whatever the case might be. It doesn't really matter. But what you're saying is that there are potentials that exist. And so from that perspective, we're not really dealing with a linear construct, right? We're dealing with a multidimensional construct, meaning a soul may choose in a multidimensional perspective to have multiple exit points where they may leave their linear timeline in a death, let's say. And those multiple points could be at age 40 and age 80 and age 90, or not necessarily in that linear perspective, but in a concept. And it doesn't really matter which one of those they would choose. Ultimately, they're still going to have the same experience, but they can choose. Is that what you mean?
Let's explain this a bit differently. Every soul comes with a plan, and that plan is a vibrationally curated one. And this is also able to be mapped by the influences of the planets and stars. So we can predetermine when a soul may struggle with something like disease. But it does not mean that that struggle with disease or that karmic period cannot be changed in its vibration or dimension. And that is where free will comes in. So when we are saying choice, disease may be perceived as something that is going to be the death of a soul. And in that perception, a choice is made at a period of time when multiple outcomes could have happened, where a soul could have chosen to live, and as opposed to healing the disease, became even a healer of others, having understood its workings. In addition to this, we know there is an ultimate period of transition from Earth. Yet, if we look back at ancient civilizations, those that lived to 500, 600 years old, that were practicing Tantra, for example, and Kundalini, they were also moderating the vibration and the dimension of that choice. So different civilizations and different bandwidths of consciousness have options within these greater choices. And they can raise the vibration and dimension enough to make them differently than what they have been predisposed to be understood as.
So as an individual human being, it's possible then that individual human being may have many different linear exit points planned as their soul's journey, and based on their consciousness level at particular points in time or choices that they make, they may choose a later exit point or an earlier exit point. So just like you were saying, in ancient times, people lived for hundreds of years. That was an act of choosing on their part to choose a later exit point, but they could just as well have left at a much earlier one.
In some respects, it is a merging of multiple aspects of self that allowed this to happen. So we're navigating a whole new topic here and bringing this up, but we think it bears explaining that those who are able to accomplish this, rejuvenate themselves and live beyond hundreds of years, were doing so not because they saw themselves as an individual soul. They were bringing in parts of themselves from other dimensions that would help restore and rejuvenate their bodies, but also perceive more choice. In other words, because there are parts of you that are ongoing right now all over the universe. So this is a harder concept to adopt. We know where you stand today, but certainly it is possible. But consider also near-death experience. This is evidence that sometimes a soul has a choice, and in the process may choose to return. And in doing so, often lives a completely different life than the one prior to the near-death experience. It doesn't have to be this extreme, however, but these predestined periods, they do occur. And every soul is different. Some have none. They have not factored in any moments of time where they would choose between life and death prior to the final moment that they have decided to leave. And others may have several periods where they wanted to evolve and upgrade so dramatically that these choices are made. It is not a static decision between all human beings.
But one thing then that would be fundamentally true, I think, at least based on my understanding of what you're saying, is that that decision of when that exit point will be in our linear timeline is not left to anyone outside of ourselves. So if there was some sort of fear of a virus that was transmissible and people were concerned that they were going to fall ill and leave the planet early as a result of this, or even a lot of the concerns were not for oneself, but transmitting it to somebody else and thereby causing them to leave the planet early. So based on what you're saying, my understanding is that such a decision could not be possible for someone or some body of people outside of ourselves to influence on our behalf.
Yes, we agree with that statement. There is nothing outside of you that can influence or take away what your soul has already decided it will do. Yet at the same time, you are making physical choices. And those physical choices are important such that your soul is having an experience. So we don't want to negate the choice so much, because we think the choice, it has its place in how you're experiencing human life. And maybe some would perceive us saying that choice doesn't truly exist, that all of those choices have already been predetermined. And we could agree with you on certain levels, but we want to remind you that you are the one who is not only feeling something about the choice, but perceiving it through a certain consciousness. And that is a contributing factor to how your soul lives out its contracts and its decisions. There's an astral piece and there's also a physical piece. And in those two must have a bearing on each other and work in concert. But ultimately, to fear death because of something outside of you, a condition, for example, or a circumstance, it is something that we believe is a huge waste of energy. In fact, it may take a soul away, from the true path of experience that it is meant to be on.
Okay, so when you're talking about choice, are you referring to physical choice or are you talking about a way of being as a choice? For example, does it matter that if in the last few years someone chose to physically become vaccinated, uh, was that choice that they made already predetermined that they were going to make that choice at that time? Or is choice really more a matter of how you walk your life and your way of being while you walk that life? For example, you can go through a period of time on planet Earth where there's turbulence and stress and fear, but maybe experience those things or not experience them, but regardless, you're in this heightened state of awareness and consciousness, and maybe you experience it as a joyful time in your life where most people are going through suffering. Is the choice really more to do with your way of being or your way of walking that path, or is it having to do with the physical actions that are taken?
We would answer this question differently based on the dimension that each human is in, and we will explain why. You are here to have a physical experience. And in order to do that, physical choice is paramount because you must feel free to choose in the moment what resonates most with your heart. The caveat is most people are not choosing based on what resonates most with their heart. Some are choosing, as you have mentioned, based on fear. And when that happens, the question is the soul taken off of its path because of that choice? And that's where we want to remind you that the soul's path is merely a container. There are going to be challenges that will be faced and choices that will be made, some of those so important that they are predestined, and others more open to reflect the truth and the feeling of the soul within. And humans on planet Earth today, to truly become multidimensional, are learning how to work with that truth and that feeling as their guide, which has not been the case for a very, very long time on planet Earth. So when you're asking us, for example, about the vaccine, and if choosing it is going to take you on a trajectory other than what you have experienced, we would say not necessarily. Because if you choose the vaccine, and there is some ramification from that, ultimately, whatever that experience was meant to be is going to play out regardless of the choice that you made. In other words, if you're going to struggle in some way with physical health or a tampering of your genetics, that is meant to be in your experience for a great purpose. But it doesn't necessarily mean it has to define you. Nor does it have to be a choice that is the stagnant and all encompassing result of what you will experience in life from that moment on. In other words, nothing is stagnant in your life, in your choice, other than what has already been predetermined. And how you experience that is the key. Let's talk about soul themes for a moment and bring this into the conversation. Every soul comes with multiple themes that extend themselves through the human condition because souls do not come to suffer, but to eliminate it. And they are willing to put themselves in some of the most difficult and uncomfortable situations to change the energy of them. But it is not in the doing, in the experience that changes the energy. It's the beingness in the experience that changes the energy. So ultimately, it has little to do with the choice. But yes, how you are being in the choice and the experience that follows, that is so important.
All right, so to look at health and aging or birth and death, for example, then is it possible for a human being, let's say they come into this earth. You said with some individuals, that's not available and so they have a definite time when they were choosing to leave the planet. But many may have multiple linear points where they may leave the planet, and so is it their physical choices? Let's say, for example, if someone were to make healthy choices or to not detoxify their body so much, would it be choices like that that would determine to what extent or to at what exit or which exit point they would leave the planet, or would it be more consciousness based choice?
Well, for example, there are many who are making very positive choices for their physical bodies out of fear. And that underlying fear is going to have an effect on the vibration of the choice, you see. So that's why we're always going back to how you are being in the decisions you are making, because fear is a vibration of stress. And you, as a human soul, could be making the very best choices in terms of physical nourishment, but the body is still not responding to those choices because there is an underlying vibration. So we're attempting to say that perhaps as souls move through higher dimensions and have more access to consciousness, they are more able to interface with and affect their soul's divine plan, raising it up into a higher dimension right along with them.
I mean, emotions are things that we came here to experience as human beings, right? Including fear. And so let's say that a particular individual is feeling fear over something, whether it be world circumstances or their own lives. And in spite of that fear, they choose to move towards something that brings them more joy or optimism or excitement in life. Even though they feel the fear and they acknowledge the fear existing, but instead move towards something that makes them happy. Is that a better approach, or is that the approach that you would suggest?
Joy, optimism, and excitement, these cultivate life force and creativity. And so we do suggest always moving in that direction, even if there is underlying fear, because what you are doing is you're expanding your availability of energy, both within choice itself, but within the span of the life that you've chosen, the destinations that your soul may arrive at. And so let's give you an example here. Let's say the world is in chaos and there is great fear about what is happening on the planet at large. But as a human being, you recognize that and you are compassionate to it, and you acknowledge the propensity for that fear to intersect with your life, but you choose to do something other than address the fear. In doing this, you're neutralizing the fear vibration itself. And because of that, your soul will soar into greater heights. Whatever your predestined birth plan involves, there are always good things that are able to be capitalized on and taken advantage of at every single stage of life, even if it is moving into a time of transition. Even in our final moments on planet Earth, we can choose to allow fear to envelop us, or we can be in a state of joy. And often the very defining factor in this comes when we begin to merge with the astral. It's not that it doesn't affect our lives on planet Earth. Certainly, if we've lived more in a state of joy and excitement and curiosity of what could be possible, we are going to be more satisfied and fulfilled and content in our lives. But when we merge and we look back on everything that we have chosen, seeing that we were willing to take the risk, to feel something better than what was available outside of us, we're always going to soar into greater heights. This is how master teachers are born. Many believe that it's the training that was had in ancient civilizations and in mystery schools that allows ascended masters and angels and multidimensional guides to be recognized for the wisdom that they have. But this wisdom comes at a moment's notice when we see our soul's ability to rise above discord. And that is truly what ascension and evolution is all about.
I foresee a lot more challenges in this decade, in particular on the planet, from a lot of things that just happened the last few years, but also financial and other kinds of circumstances as well. And do you concur with that? Is that a potential that's currently in our timeline?
The souls who have embodied in this timeline were anticipating tremendous growth and evolution. So, in order for that to happen, have come at a time when things were seeded to allow that to take place. Now, we don't necessarily believe that everything has to play out the way that it is shown in the stars. Financial difficulties can be translated through many different personal circumstances. It can be the way a soul values its personal worth. It can be the way that humanity, as an entire race and civilization, values its worth. Yet we do know that money is a physical construct of that worth. So it's inevitable that the way you have perceived and worked with money is apt to upgrade, because we're seeing so much change internally within souls, individual souls across the board who are raising in consciousness are choosing better for themselves in all areas. They are choosing, as you've mentioned, cleaner diets. They are choosing to meditate on a regular basis. There are so many different avenues and paths of freedom that we see being taken. And because of this, what has held you back before, or what has been hidden in the dark, must come to light. And certainly your monetary system is entangled in a great deal of malevolent focus. And that can't come with you on the trajectory that so many of you are already on. So while we see perhaps it's inevitable you may struggle with something, it is all in how that struggle is perceived. Is it something that's changing to catch up and catch speed to your ascending consciousness? Or is it something that is meant to hold you back and that you're meant to suffer through? This very choice of perspective is what helps it to manifest in the way that it comes about.
So if you are somebody who does go through difficulties in this decade, and whether it be any of those circumstances or others, what you're saying is the best way to navigate or to walk that path is to feel the fear, if it happens to come up, about those circumstances, but then still move toward things that will lead to optimism or joy or excitement.
We agree that what you are saying, it is a good path to take, because to negate the fear is to negate a valuable opportunity to actually become stronger and more courageous and ascend. And we know humans across the globe already are in very vulnerable states in regards to their financial position. So we do want to make a few recommendations. Your personal sovereignty and your earning capability, the prosperity that is your birthright, is yours to self-generate. There is no one in the world beyond the self that is here to offer to you this inheritance we have been speaking of. Yet, the inheritance, it is going to naturally come through you as a creative offering and back to you through the hands of others. This co-cooperation and orchestration between humans is the orchestration of God and universe. And so it is going to take a way of seeing yourself in the world that is different than what many are used to. Instead of waiting for things to arrive that are going to be helpful and perhaps save a soul from what it is experiencing, there is a certain level of self-autonomy that we believe is meant to come to the surface and resilience. So if you are going to feel the fear, let that fear be the motivating factor in finding your strength and courage and knowing that you are able to self-generate whatever is needed by expressing yourself in the world authentically. And that is the key. You're moving into a period of authenticity and unity and service. And what that means is that very specific piece of the puzzle that we have spoken about, that all are breathing life into, comes to life through you at a time when you may have doubted it was possible.
To go back to an earlier topic, we were talking about how the ancients, some of them lived to hundreds of years. Now, in current times on Earth, the average lifespan isn't anywhere near that. At best, people live from 80 to 100 years. Only a few that are documented anyway that have lived beyond that, although there are some stories of people who have lived hundreds of years in current times. But it isn't something that's prevalent. So is it even possible for human beings in our current state of consciousness to reach for that length of time, or to even have those potentials in our options? Well, I shouldn't say any, obviously there are probably some humans who have those options, but is that possible for somebody listening to this show today to take certain steps to extend or to choose a much later potential timeline, or in their timeline, that may exceed what the average human being lives to today, or what we believe is possible?
Well, we want to clarify first that it is an option for every single soul. Remember, this isn't an extension necessarily of linear years. Think of it as a moving up into a higher plane and dimension, where the consciousness that you have attained is expanding your lifespan by bringing in the aspects of self from multiple dimensions. It's somewhat like becoming a different person. So if we go back to the resurrection, for example, which is spoken of in biblical accounts, this resurrection was possible because Jesus did not see himself as one man. He saw himself as many masters, and in that belief was able to extend his body beyond the circumstances and events that are spoken of in that account. But you've asked if it's possible in this timeline, and we want to speak to the most detrimental thing that is holding you back, and it is belief. You have been programmed to believe that age is only able to be extended to a certain number. There's an expectation of when death is going to come. And those in ancient civilizations that practiced ancient rites and rituals to extend themselves beyond had no limiting belief of its possibility. So we must start there. This is not only a generational pattern and belief, but it's further reinforced through media and through television programming and everything that you are paying attention to, many of you, on a daily basis. So to first eradicate that belief is extremely important. But we also have to speak to the cells. Because in ancient times, the cells within human bodies were very different than they are today. In fact, the upkeep of the cells through, again, meditation and tantric practice was of utmost importance. The cells generate light, and that light is life force. And if the energy of the cell either dies or is depleted, it is not going to support the physical body in rejuvenating to the state it is capable. So in physical, there is a component of this that is just as important as any spiritual practice or belief. And that is that the body must restore its cellular energy and perhaps even increase that energy to a certain degree in order to go back in time and appear as the youthful being that it was before. And what we see coming in your future is a very specific focus on the cells. We think the cells have been ignored for a very long time. And in medical institutions, there's been a propensity to diagnose certain organs as failing, for example, or processes in the body as failing, or cancers developing, which are a conglomeration of negative cells, when the power of each individual cell can override all and any of this. So ultimately what we're seeing is cellular energy has been so depleted that it is very difficult in this timeline for humans to regenerate. But we would say focus there. Beyond the belief, focus there. Because the miraculous light and energy that comes from the center of each cell is so restorative in nature that it will go beyond healing disease. It will carry you into more and more youthful states.
Okay, we're almost done for today, and I want to sort of end on a particular conversation. Is it even necessary if we know that we're living in a particular physical reality at the moment where there are certain events taking place globally that are influencing or affecting our society or even our personal lives? Would it be better for us to just ignore that those things are happening and go about our lives and do whatever, focus our minds on more positive things, and not know, not pay attention to those things? Or is it necessary for our human experience to be aware of and pay attention to those things, but maintain a higher vibration or higher state of being, meanwhile taking physical action to compensate for those things that are taking place? As a very simple, basic example, let's say I know that there are toxins in the food that I'm eating, and I know that, but I decide just to be happy and to not take any physical steps to remove those toxins or detoxify those toxins. Does it matter? Am I better off just ignoring it and being happy, or is it necessary for me to pay attention to these physical circumstances that exist and to take actual steps in a physical sense in addition to my state of being optimistic?
Well, it's logical to believe that if you are paying attention to the things that are going wrong, you will amplify those things in your world. And while this is true to a certain degree, you also must consider that as a physical human being, you would not experience anything in your reality if it were not for great purpose. So as consciousness expands, naturally, you are going to become aware of the various polarities of light and dark and all spectrums in between. And that, we believe, is most important. So condemning or ignoring anything is not helpful, we believe, in a soul's evolutionary path, because anything that is not attended to in some way is going to follow a soul into its next incarnation, not because it's done something wrong, but because if that energy was present, it was begging your attention for a specific reason. It is how that attention is placed that is so important. And this is why we believe consciousness is the answer to your question. If you are consciously able to attune your attention to anything, regardless of whether it is light or dark, you will perceive it in multiple lights, and it will have deep meaning to you that will culminate in some expression creatively. a decision, an offering of service, an act of grace. These things are the reason that you came to planet Earth to begin with. So we hesitate to say that you should ignore anything. But if you are not consciously able to manage the way that you perceive it, meaning it's causing such fear or anger or sorrow that it is affecting your vibration, perhaps for a period of time, it's best to close the door on things that are holding you back from allowing your soul to accelerate. Vibration is important, and we have to consider vibration. And a very easy, simplistic way to distill this is how you are feeling. You want to be feeling more joy than sorrow. You want to be feeling more excitement than sadness or fear. But you certainly want to be aware of what's causing the fear and sadness so that you can replace it with things that are better. And we could say that every soul's contract involves this to some degree. You are here not to leave the darkness behind, but to bring it with you in a new form. Darkness itself is not bad. In our civilizations and in our star systems, we revere contrast. But our contrast is not harming other individuals as it is here. It's not detrimental to our physical or emotional being. It's a simple choice. And that's where you're moving the earth. But back to its origins, where contrast abounds. But that contrast may simply be a preference, something that you desire or do not, and others choose that you wouldn't. This is where we believe the most important message can be found. Opening yourself up to everything, regardless of what it is how your soul becomes a conduit for changing it for the better.
If I'm, let's say, a member of an indigenous tribe that's living in the middle of nowhere on planet Earth currently, and I perceive that there are many different versions of reality on Earth today, and let's say that tribe is not at all interacting with the rest of the population of the planet. So for them, everything that took place the last few years, they may not even know what 5G is or vaccines or viruses. They're living in their own little bubble of reality that's completely separate from ours. So what you're saying is from that standpoint, they really are not drawn to know about any of these things. And so for them, it's perfectly fine to go about their lives and not be aware and pursue whatever they choose to pursue or whatever is drawing their attention. But for those of us who are living in westernized society, let's say, who are aware of what's taking place and are aware of what we started this conversation with, these global institutions that are starting to take over the population in some respects. So you're saying that to know that exists and to ignore it would not be the best approach, but rather if we're being made aware of it, then it is something that we should take a look at, but then choose in our lives to live in a certain way as a result of that knowledge.
Yes. It is not that native civilizations do not see what you see. They simply perceive it in ways more applicable to the lifestyle that they have chosen. For example, you see 5G as a malevolent force on planet Earth. And native civilizations know of dark forces, and they are always protecting against them. It is just that perhaps they don't need to know the specifics that you are now exposed to. So every soul that is exposed to anything has an ingrained purpose in that exposure. But ultimately, it's how that exposure is perceived as something negative or as fuel to put on the fire of a soul and move it along on its journey to create something better. And native civilizations may be doing this in their own way as they are facing their own challenges that are a bit different than the ones that you face today. It truly goes back to the example we gave about geographic regions and how, while everyone on the planet is dealing with the similar themes that are playing out, some of them have chosen to live in certain cultures or races or regions where that struggle is more intensified or less intensified or a bit different. But ultimately, it's all a contributing force to the entire Earth and moving her forward into a higher dimension.
So essentially all the human race in the last few years experienced some sort of difficult period. It's just our interpretation of it varied depending on the society in which we lived and our constructs of what our reality is.
Or some were aware but did not face difficulty at all. You see, in different bandwidths of consciousness and in different dimensions, darkness might exist in the same amount as it does in others. But the people who are there choose to not let it disturb them and use it as the force within that strengthens their relationship to the entire world.
And what can the average person do to achieve such a state that they can walk their path without being afflicted by these occurrences?
Well, as in many ancient civilizations throughout history, knowing thyself has been the cornerstone of ascension. And we bring this to your attention because we believe that those who do not know themselves or have been told who they are the ones most vulnerable to walking a path of suffering. When you know yourself, the inherent courage within that self must emerge. And there is nothing that becomes difficult in the outer world to choose or not choose, because in each moment you are simply aligning with that self-knowing. So going back to the inner sanctum that many of the mystery schools were so focused on, understanding the self at an intrinsic level, getting rid of the noise that hides that truth is one of the most pivotal and important steps today. We see humans being exposed to way too much information. And there is a huge difference between infinite possibility and consumption of information, because much of this is a program meant to carry you even further away from the innate essence of your soul. You see, in ancient civilizations and in ancient tribes, the children were brought into the daily tasks of the day, of the tribe, whether it was hunting or fishing or cooking or building. It was not yet known what they would most enjoy or where their talents were best served. But they would observe very closely where these children best fit and revered the contribution that they were able to make in these areas. It wasn't just the elders that were leaving behind traditions, but the wisdom keepers known as the youth coming in to supply the new ideas and changing those avenues that were so important. And this has been lost from the very beginning of a child's journey on planet Earth. They are being directed away from themselves. So the return to self, we believe, is the antidote, truly, for all of it.
Well, thank you very much for the conversation today and for answering all of my questions. And thank you, Micheila.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us today for this show. And you'll be seeing a lot more of this in the future on different other interesting topics as well. So stay tuned for that, and we'll see you next time.